Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Moms Like Me, powered by Support Now. Today's episode is one that you will certainly not want to miss. We have not yet had on the podcast a person or a widow that has experienced like true loss. And as we were thinking about who we could bring on the podcast that could present a perspective on what it's like to lose someone, the first person that came to our mind was our guest today. So today we are joined by an incredible mom, an incredible leader, and she has so much to her story that we will get into. But today's guest is Rachel Faulkner Brown. Rachel, thank you for joining us today and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jordan. I'm excited to be here. I love you. I love Morgan. I love the whole Support Now team. So I'm honored to be here. And I love being a mom.
And you love being a mom. You check all of our boxes.
I know, and I'm needing a lot of support. Oh my God. So yeah.
Well, Rachel's story, I shouldn't even tell it. I'm not the one to tell it. Because honestly, if I were to say it out loud, no one would believe me.
Yeah.
It's such an unbelievable story. So Rachel, for those that aren't familiar with you and your journey, please share with us.
Yeah. I mean, my story started in 98, really, when I married my college sweetheart. And we got married the week after I graduated. And 3.5 years into marriage, he had a massive aneurysm in my best friend's driveway. So I was, left widowed at 23 and thinking, the world was my oyster and the world came crashing down essentially. And we did not have children. So I will say for me, I went back to work 2 weeks later. Life was obviously so insanely different. But, I wasn't taking care of anyone else. I just had to get myself out the door. I had to get myself fed. And the funny story is I would order Pizza Hut every Sunday night and eat the whole freaking pizza and breadsticks by myself. I mean, that was my support for myself. That was my emotional coping skill, I guess. At that point in my life, it was breadsticks. But anyway, it was hard. It was lonely. It was me and the dog. And then I remarried 2 years later to a family friend who had actually been in our wedding, and his parents were my friends. I mean, his parents and my in-laws were best friends. And Blair was a fighter pilot. I mean, he was a total stud. He dropped bombs every day. And I mean, gosh, it was like, what more could I ask for? Fiscally responsible, loved Jesus, lived in a cool town, was totally into me. And I was like, all right, this is great. This is God just totally providing, and I thought, I was like, Blair's 35, loves Jesus. Like, God, we should go out. And I'd seen him in town and we did. And, the rest is history. Got engaged in March, married in July of 2003, started having a family in 2005. And, finished our family, boy and a girl, and he went out to fly on a beautiful day in 2008 and was killed on the runway. In a freak accident, he took off with a student pilot who was 22, and his wife was 7 months pregnant with their first baby. And, they were talking, this was in the days of Amish friendship bread. So I'd been making Amish friendship bread, which Blair loved. And on the taxi out, he's telling Matthew all about my Amish friendship bread. Have you ever had it? Matthew was from Pennsylvania, and just the sweetest, most, life-giving conversation. Blair was asking about the baby. What are they naming the baby? And then he literally evaporates into heaven in 30 seconds later after this conversation. So, listening to the tape, I mean, I can remember going in, honestly, Jordan, and listening to, the black box and the tape and just thinking, I can't believe this is my life. But, they were both killed instantly. But this time I had children. And it was just so, the exponential difference, which for me is why I started the ministry that I have today. Because, we started out ministering to widows with children in the home because that was my story. That was my friends, my widow friends that I kind of roped into doing this with me. That was all of our stories. And I think when you're trying to feed people, food is such a big deal, obviously. When you're trying to feed 2 other people, get them dressed, change out seasons, get the clothes bought. It's so overwhelming. Plus yourself, which is the last person who gets help, right? And then So for me, I mean, I can remember looking in the rearview mirror and just thinking, "Oh my gosh, like I can do Widow. I can do Widow by myself." But Widow was 2 little people who needed dad, and we just had Blair's 39th birthday, and I mean, the loss is just the exponential magnification of loss. And, we talk about secondary and tertiary losses. It's like, is there a millionth loss for fatherhood? Because it is just, and at the same time, like, I think most widows would say this. I'm so glad it wasn't me because that nurturer in the home, like, I just as amazing of a father as Blair was that I could deduce in the short time that we had, God knew what my kids needed, and he knew what they needed down the road. I remarried 6 years later, so I was widowed for about 6 years. I remarried Rod, who was a pastor here in Atlanta, and, my kids got a dad. We're almost 12 years in, and he's just now adopting them because we wanted it to be their decision. So it's, like, hilarious, like, Davis is a grown adult getting adopted, but it's amazing, and Campbell was like, "I want you to be my dad. I want to take your name." So she's gonna be Campbell Faulkner Brown. She's gonna be what my name is, and so the redemption and the sweetness, and it's been hard. Oh my gosh, it has not been easy. I mean, a part of my story I was just telling you a minute ago was, we walked through my daughter's eating disorder 2 years ago. She came home from treatment last weekend 2 years ago, and my body, man, it remembered. It kept the score. I was like, "I'm feeling so off," and I looked at the date, and I was like, "Oh, December 14th, the day we brought her home, the day she'd been away from her home for 3.5 months with anorexia. The day she comes home, we're thinking we knew it wasn't, like, foolproof. She wasn't totally healed, but it was like, "Oh my gosh, let's just get her back." And, oh, it was, I mean, my body knew, man. Again, unbelievable. It is a lot. It is a lot. And it's so wild to me how some people can go through life with relatively nothing going on, and some certain people go through life and it just seems like everything happens to them. And so I do want to ask you about that because I think that when people are going through something sudden, which you did twice, which Yeah.
is so unbelievable, how could you not say, why me? Like, how did you actually process? Because I'd imagine the second time, yes, it was harder because you had kids. But then was there ever a moment of doubt, if like just like even questioning like your purpose and going through this because you're looking around probably thinking no one else has had to experience this or anything close to this.
Yeah, I mean, the only person I'd ever known that had done it was Elizabeth Elliot, and I loved her story. I'd watched Tip into the Spear. I knew Elizabeth's story, but, I never thought I'd be her. Oh my gosh. I was just like, I'm just going to live my life, and I've experienced the most horrible thing ever, and we're just going to sail right on through. And that wasn't what happened. And I would say to most people, like, just don't bank on that. Life is just hard, So I think the thing is for me, and if you've ever heard me talk, like I was a spiritual Pollyanna. I mean, I had all the right answers. I had done all the Bible studies, and for me, it was slap a scripture on it and it's going to be better. Well, that is not the case. I mean, yes, I love the inherent word of God. And yes, Jesus is the end all be all. But if you don't feel things, you will not heal things. And so for me, that was just what I did. I was like, it's just easier not to feel. And I'd kind of been programmed. My parents, as amazing as they were depressed. They were raised by depression babies who did not have time to nobody was going to therapy 45 years ago. I mean, if you were going to therapy, you were getting committed. I mean, kind of. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was like you were going to the psych ward at the hospital. I mean, that was what I thought therapy was. It was electric shock treatment and things you see on TV. And it's anything but that. But when you're raised by a family, there just aren't many 70-plus-year-olds out there who've been to a lot of therapy. And so I was raised, in a generation where that wasn't welcomed, that we were in a small town. And so, you just learned stuff. And that's what I did. So the combination of emotional stuffing and religion, not grace, that's a really toxic combination. And so honestly, yeah. So that's what I carried into Blair's death. It was just like, oh, well, I'm just going to give Jesus praise and give him all the glory and talk about the Lord and bring more people to Jesus. And that's what this is all for. And that's true. But that is not the whole story. He wanted me healed, whole, and delivered.
Right. And exactly. And it's great to have, I think people often think that perception is reality. If I'm projecting that this is how I'm healing, then I will be okay and everyone will support me. So I'm curious, how did you actually begin to support yourself? What were some of the tactics and tools that you use to really heal?
Yeah.
In addition to the things that, from a religious point of view, you also believed in that would help you on your way.
Yeah. Well, I posted this quote a few days ago. It was like, to the measure that you can be honest with yourself is the measure that you will heal. And if you are avoiding anything in your life, whether it's finances, I avoided finances. For me, it was like, I'm just going to be like, we'll just spend money till I can't spend money. You know what I mean? I just was like compartmentalized. I was like, I don't want to deal with that. And that's not the answer. God has given me stewardship over my time, talent, and treasure. So I would say for me, I avoided the secret shames in my life. I was like, I was telling somebody yesterday, I was like, whatever you cannot be honest about is the limiting factor on your life. That is just, I don't care if you're in grief. I don't care if you're walking around, you've never experienced anything hard. To the level that you can be honest is the level that you will get healed. And this is confess your sins one to another so that you will be healed, not that you will be forgiven. It's for you. So if you're not saying all the things or like doing things at night, and for widows, like, you can drink a bottle of wine and nobody's going to notice. And then you can just go to bed and do it all over again. And it's a common problem. I mean, abuse and prescription abuse, it happens all the time for people in grief. And I think for me, I was just not honest about my past. I had been, abused by a distant relative. I'd never told anyone. And so that was the great unraveling of my life. I always say people come into my midst and they get freedom and healing, not because Blair died, not because Todd died. That was the catalyst to get me to a place of freedom and exposure and vulnerability with my own story. Because, and I mean, we have helped thousands of widows and I see it every single time. The reason they get to the retreat or the conference is because their husband died. The reason they get freedom and healing is typically their abortion, their abuse, their marriage that they can't really be honest about when he dies. They're just like, oh, let me just make him sound great. And he was just a total jerk, or he was abusive and they've never told anyone. And that being honest with what really happened is the measure that you will find freedom.
Let me ask you this. You talk about being honest, which I think is super important. I know a lot of grievers, especially in the early days, really struggle to articulate kind of what their needs are. They struggle to be honest about how someone can support them. And we know a lot of that has to do with the trauma and the decision fatigue that someone's going through. And as you reflect back on the experience, what were some of the things the community could do for you that actually were helpful?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, the biggest one is I was in Kroger with a friend. I will never forget it. And this is, oh my gosh, it's so hilarious and so embarrassing. But again, because widows live so much of their life alone, and you've got little people who aren't noticing, or you're hiding at night when they go to bed, or, while they're at school, whatever. My friend happened to see me in one of these moments. I was in Kroger and this woman was screaming at me. She was on a scooter with oxygen tank. And she was screaming at me in the microwave popcorn aisle that I was going to get cancer. And here she was, like, sicker than a dog and, like, so sick, clearly just a mess. And not because of her own choosing, but I mean, you're just like, you're unloading on me because I'm buying. And I lost my mind, Jordan. And my friend was watching me literally want to choke this woman in Kroger. I mean, I'm not even kidding. Like, I I was like, I love
You're
Jesus.
like, let me have her. Let me
Yeah.
have her.
And in that moment, I was like, girl, I'm going to put you. Like, if you say one more thing to me, and I rarely feel that, but boy, she had just caught me on the wrong day. And my friend happened to see it. She was with me. And honestly, like, I think that's why community is so important because they will see things that you aren't seeing. You are inside the jar. You cannot read your own label. And she read my label. She was like, "Oh my gosh, Rachel, you need help." And I would say, if you go from 0 to 60, and this is what my therapist said, she was like, if you go from 0 to 60 in anger or anything in like a matter of seconds, there is an underlying thing that needs to be healed. And I didn't even know that was like a thing because, again, no one in my family had ever been to therapy. We didn't have language around emotional health. And I think it's really common for 40 to 60-year-olds to just not, if you lose someone in that time frame and life's kind of been hunky dory, you really just, and you haven't had marriage issues or whatever. And most people don't go to therapy before 35. I wouldn't say a lot of people don't. My kids, unfortunately, are the
And I mean to ask you, how old were they when he died?
2 years old and 5 months.
Wow.
Yeah, they were like babies. I mean, they knew nothing. But Rebecca saw this and she was like, "You need therapy," and that was. So I always, a big, huge piece of even our ministry is community because community sees things you don't. And when they spend time with you and you invite them into your home. I mean, I paid a woman to come watch me parent one day because I knew I was missing the mark. I knew I wasn't, I wasn't like, all I wanted to do was just not do things that were right with my kids. I just wanted to spank them and just, I couldn't control them. And it was so frustrating because I was like master of controlling myself and, self control and all the things that I could do as a mature adult, but I couldn't get these kids to do. And I was just very frustrated. So I think you got to invite people in. Again, it's that whole honesty thing, but they got to get up close enough. And I think with social media, it keeps this level, praise the Lord. I didn't have Instagram to like do my grief journey. I mean, gosh, I would have performed, honestly. And I think a lot of widows just perform their way through grief because that's what social media, that's kind of what social media and the algorithm wants, right? I mean, it wants to see it all pretty. And then it can be the opposite where you become a total victim because that's what people want to see too. I mean, it's psycho. It is absolutely psycho. So I'm just so thankful God spared me, like that it was, '08 and there was no Instagram at that, or maybe there was and I just wasn't on it. But I mean, I'm like, oh God, these poor widows who are writing, posts every day about their grief journey. That's tricky. I mean, I just think some of that stuff is for the Lord.
I'm so curious. Why do you think you would have performed?
Oh, because I was a performer. Because I was just unwrapped because I walked in shame. I mean, when you have shame, you're like, I got to be something great because I got to cover all this mess up, And so, I actually grew up in musical theater. Like, it's like I knew how to perform. That was just kind of the way I was a performer. I sang. I mean, I was singing in church and and singing, all the things like I think for people who have a talent, like it comes really naturally. So you just like, let me just throw that on grief, and do that thing too. Widows become famous overnight. I mean, it's hard. It is not easy to handle grief and walking your own journey and then be talking to a phone all day. I mean, that's not normal. And people think it's normal now. And I just am like, oh my gosh. I mean, I'm doing it too. And at the same time, I'm so thankful God had me protected where I didn't feel the need to like share everything, or perform or make it an income. I mean, gosh, that's the other thing. You feel such desperation to make money. So it's like, let me figure out how to do this. And then I think a lot of times you get in this machine and you become something you're like, I don't think I wanted to keep this.
Well, and it's so taxing to your point. Like, it appears so easy to the person watching because it's just video. But behind the scenes, someone's got to be hitting the record button, and behind the scenes, someone's splicing that video and adding captions, and you're doing that on top of a time where you're so empty. You're so empty. And
Oh, yeah.
and I'd imagine just the engagement, that kind of that outsider's engagement validation of your grief just makes it even trickier.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God. Everybody's commenting on this. I mean, it's really twisted, honestly. Like, I would totally need therapy if I did grief on Instagram. I mean, just for that alone. But I will say, for me, that was the great unraveling of shame and just hiding. And, I was a master at hiding. I mean, oh my gosh, from like high school on, when you get abused, you become a hider, even though you're a performer. I mean, it's so weird, And so all of that, the wheels came off. I let go of the secret at 35. 37, I got a hold of what I would call a real gospel, which was you're fully forgiven, you're radically righteous. I didn't know that. I didn't realize how loved I was. I thought I was loved because of the things I did for God. Like he needed my help. And I was just like, wait, you don't need my help? Like, I don't understand. Like, I can really help you. I'm going to sell you to the world. I can sell ice to Eskimos. He didn't need me to do that. I mean, the Christian life is so tricky in grief because we don't know how to lament. We don't know how to just sit in pain. We don't love being uncomfortable. And that's where the growth happens, right? Comfort is the enemy of growth. It is the enemy of growth. But yet we have to give comfort, right? I mean, you comfort those who mourn, but you can comfort those who mourn too much. I'm just going to be really honest. Like you can comfort them into being a victim. And that I think for me is what I was determined to not let happen because at any cost, I did not want my kids to use their dad's death as a crutch for being brats or being lazy or yeah, I don't know. Like I was like, that's not going to be our story.
Yeah, so that was my next question. I think naturally, you had to touch young kids, which
Yeah.
again, I'm so enamored by this like survival mentality that you had to be in at that point. And what were some of the ways that you have supported your kids along the way so that you can honor his memory while also not making it such to where that's their story? It's a part of their story, but that's not the whole story that they're telling.
Yeah, and there's I mean, I talk about this with widows all the time and my team because I do think there's a really healthy balance. Because I can see, and again, it comes back to social media. There's this tendency, like, I'm going to share every date, every year. And it's like, I'm not that person. I'm just kind of like, if my kids are grieving, I'm going to tend to it, but I'm not going to create an opportunity for them to cry. You know what I mean? Or for them to feel things and a lot of widows would be like, that's not okay. You need to create those opportunities. And I don't believe that. I just believe God is healing them on their own time frame. And I don't have to create some, moment for them to connect with their dad. And that's going to happen really naturally. And so I would say I'm on the spectrum of less is more. But what I have done is I put them in grief therapy, play therapy, like almost immediately. When we moved to Huntsville from Columbus, it like totally upset our apple cart. Blair died in Columbus. We moved to Huntsville and we had new surroundings, new neighbors. Everything was new. And that really set Davis's grief off. And I had to find some help. I was like, oh, something is so wrong. One, he had a spirit of grief that, a demonic spirit that had kind of attached to him. Because, I don't know. I don't know how that happens, but it did. And I took authority over that. That was the first time I'd ever done anything like that. It was like reading This Present Darkness. I was like, oh my gosh. Like, he vomited and it made such a believer out of me, of my position in the kingdom and my story over the darkness. And I mean, God, it just, you move a spirit of grief out of your home and you're never going to be the same. And he was 5 years old and we never had the stomach bug. Like there was no other explanation, but that grief spirit came out, when he vomited, which is such a weird story, but it's real. And so for me, I had to get them into something, and play therapy was really the only thing that little kids can do. They can't do, CBT, and they can't do, that's it. They can play, and they played out their grief. And honestly, that's what I tell young moms. I'm like, if you can find a great play therapist, and there aren't that many. They're very few. But at the end of the day, to me, that was the one thing that I'm like so thankful. And then, we've had moments, we've done a lot of inner healing, which is inviting Jesus into the pain, into the hard moments. And my kids have done a lot of inner healing too, because what Jesus can heal in like 15 seconds takes years sometimes in the logical mind.
Yeah.
And so I just believe that the right brain is so underutilized in healing. And so I've gone really after both my kids are very creative, they're both very visual. And so I feel like when they have experiences and encounters with God in their right brain, it sticks versus logic. It doesn't necessarily stick. It's like listening to a sermon versus listening to a story. You're remembering the story. You're probably not remembering that sermon. And so for me, that was like a big thing that I'm really thankful I did.
Wow. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about Never Alone Widows and through all of this, why you created it, what it is, and frankly, like how people can find it if they know someone that could be a good candidate for it.
I think the best that was the best ministries are the ministries that you never set out to start. I was doing I had a storytelling ministry called Be Still, and out of that, I was like, let's do outreach. Like, I'd gone over to Birmingham, and a friend had, there were like 9 widows who'd all gone to Auburn in Birmingham. And she was like, will you come over and just tell your story, and we'll go get massages at Ross Bridge, and then we'll do a lovely brunch the next day, and then you can pray for them and then go home. And I was like, oh my gosh, massage and tell my story. Okay. Yeah, I'm totally there. That'll be fun. And a friend of mine who was a widow too, we went together. And on the way back, I was just like, man, like, we could do this. Like, I already have a ministry. Like, I can raise some money, and we could bring in 20 widows from all over the country with your little kids and do, basically what they did with like my slant on it. I wanted to give them a prophetic word. I wanted to have a session with a therapist. I wanted to, really give them practical tools with lavish love, with gifts. I love gifts. I love gift giving. Widows have to buy their own gifts. I was like, I want them to not even have to think. And then we just started the retreat out of that. And now, here we are 38 retreats later, 4 conferences, curriculum. I mean, I'm like, what are we doing? Like this, and this has all happened in the last 4.5 years. And, just because of a little tiny idea that was just like the outreach plan, and it really became the ministry. So now I don't run Be Still Ministries anymore. I just run Never Alone, and Be Still is its own ministry, which is awesome. And they're doing great. We have 60 plus local chapters across the country in, cities all across the country. And so you can go to the website, it's neveralonewidows.com, and just, click on whatever state you're in, and you can see if there's a group there. And we're about to probably start an online group because of people, my goal is in 10 years to have 1,000 cities represented. That's the goal, but I have the goal.
And you know what? I think you'll blow past it. Based off of everything I've heard, you will blow past it, Rachel.
Yeah.
I was writing down a few words as you were speaking because you really are what you preach. You are honest and refreshing, and it's inspiring. It is. It's really inspiring. I know that you didn't set out to be inspiring. You took what this life gave you, and you made the best of it, and how better the world is for that.
Yeah.
So thank
Well,
you.
it's, you look back at your life and you said, how did you not ask the question why? And I think the Lord just protected me from that. Honestly, Jordan, this was a talk that I gave at our conference, and I just said the best question is not why, but who? Who is on the other side of your pain? And I think for me, even in my broken, emotionally unhealed state, I knew there was a who. And that's what I held to. I knew God wasn't punishing me. I hadn't done anything but do Bible studies. I mean, I was just like, and covered up my secrets. So I just think that's the question. It's like, who is on the other side of any of our pain? Because that's the kingdom, right? I mean, that's the kingdom.
Beautiful. Well, Rachel, again, thank you so much for your generous time today. And I know that this will be a very valuable interview for those to listen to. Last quick note, if you know someone that is going through a loss, whether that's anticipatory grief or maybe someone that has just passed away, I encourage you to take a look at Support Now as a tool, as a platform to rally your community in all the ways that matter, some of which that Rachel touched on, whether that's money, whether that's meals, updates, volunteering. We love, love, love to serve this community because we know that these are the people that frankly need it the most. And so thank you, Rachel, and look forward to seeing you shine and crush those goals over and over again.
Love you, Jordan. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye.